This meeting is being recorded.
I'm happy to report I figured it out.
Yay.
I now have a degree in Zoom, and it is streaming to Georgia Women's page, not to my personal page. So yippee.
Oh, good for you, Marty. I'm
Yay.
impressed. I'm impressed.
I'm astounded.
Hi, Marty.
Hi, whoever's. Oh, hey, Kathy. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? You look very nice today.
Thanks. Wow, I should call you every day. I will FaceTime you on a regular basis.
There you go. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hello, Brenda.
I see Debbie's in.
Oh, it's my sister. You
Hey,
got
Debbie.
makeup on today.
Yeah, and makeup on it. Earrings, please.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I am so impressed.
I'm fresh from the shower.
Well, we're glad you're clean. Clean is good.
Clean is good. Yes.
Clean is good. Yay.
Yep, we're recording all these wonderful conversations.
There's Barry.
Yep.
Debbie's speaker isn't working. Does that mean just nod? Can you hear us? Debbie? Oh, Barry's nodding. Debbie, can you hear us? I'm guessing that's a no from Debbie. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't set it up for closed captioning. I wonder if it's too late to do that.
Probably not.
Hey, y'all, can you hear me?
Oh, Lord.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's working. Yay.
Yay. Okay, the closed captioning is above my pay grade. So maybe next time, maybe between now and our next lunch and learn just the facts, ma'am, I will learn how to do closed captioning. And then I'll have a PhD in Zoom.
Oh. Hey, Chester,
Yes.
I want to know if you're going to assess this presentation.
I have Barry. I have so much assessment stuff to do coming up. You know, Barry knows my hatred of assessment. He had to listen to my gripes, you know, for a number of years about that. So Africana studies, we're coming up for the, you know, program review.
Yeah, yeah.
So you know what that means.
I
Okay?
do. I do quite well. Yes.
Exactly. So I'm not looking forward to it.
Mm.
How you been?
Been doing good. I've been enjoying retirement. Don't shy away from it when your time comes.
Well, my time actually has come and been here, but I have so much going on. I'm one of these people that keeps reinventing themselves, that kind of thing. So, and I enjoy it. So,
Good. That's great.
yeah.
That's really good.
But I am looking forward to the day when I can have that retirement grin that everybody I know who retires from Mercer has. Walk around with this grin, over their face. They kind of look at the rest of us who are working with that grin like a grandparent, like.
It's the bless your heart grin.
Right. Yeah. You're going to work, right? You're going to teach. You're grading papers, right? That kind of stuff. Like, go away.
Oh my.
Well, it's getting about that time. I wanted to make sure that we start on time so that I know some people may have some things they need to do. And so I want to welcome everyone to our first lunch and learn just the facts, ma'am. We're going to talk about just the facts, which is kind of confusing as some would call it critical race theory, but I call it facts. I call it history.
Right.
And I really do. This is a topic that's dear and sweet to my heart. I want to thank Georgia Women and the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this event. I'm very, very excited to be a part of it, but I'm also, again, very excited that you took time out of your busy day to be here and to participate with us on this occasion. And really, we're excited because we have the best. We have the best speaker in the world, I think, who could present. Oh, you're my friend too. Should I say that?
I know. All right. Appreciate it.
But to present for us, Dr. Chester Fontenot earned a BA in theoretical science and theoretical math and political science from Whitaker College in 1972 and a PhD in comparative cultures from the University of California at Irvine in 1975. He did postdoctoral studies at Yale University and attended Christian Theological Seminary, and he came to Mercer. Aren't we glad to have him here in Macon? We're so fortunate. And that he must have drank the water because he's still here. Dr. Fontenot is the author or editor of several books. He has written over 60 articles, numerous book reviews and newspaper articles. Dr. Fontenot was the founding member and the first chair of the Modern Language Association in African American Literature section and the editor of the Black American Literature Forum. He has just done so much. Lectured over 60 universities. He's the who's of the who's, right? Got who's in 21st century, who's American education, who's among American teachers. His biography is included in the National Biological Center in London, England. Dr. Fontenot has earned national and international reputation in his fields of academic research and has lectured, and again, there's over 40 universities in the United States and 6 universities in 4 countries abroad. He is the general editor of the Mercer University Press book series, Voices of African Diaspora. He has also served as a consultant for 30 years for multiculturalism and inclusiveness. Dr. Fontenot, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for that generous introduction. I often tell people, I'm a kind of down home boy that grew up without very much in Los Angeles, in Compton to be exact. Creole parents from Louisiana, and so every time somebody introduces me, I kind of wonder who they're talking about, kind of. But I'm here, and yes, Brenda, I must have drunk the water. I've stayed around and continuing to work and do things, et cetera. So I'm glad to be here and be part of this coming together by this distinguished assembly. Let me just say, and I'm not going to talk very long. I don't believe in, long talks. I think people kind of lose you after a while. I know I do, so this whole question about critical race theory, I mean, Brenda is entirely correct. I mean, we can actually just sum it up with just saying, teach the facts, teach all the facts, but people don't understand. The confusion is they don't understand the development of this methodology called critical race theory. It's been in existence for well over 40 years, but it's primarily a construct for law schools. I mean, nobody who is not teaching at a law school actually teaches critical race theory. It is a law school construct. It developed because a law professor, scholar, wrote a text that became the dominant text in introductory law courses entitled Critical Legal Theory. And looking at the way law works and looking at it historically, et cetera. But then a very well-known law professor from Yale, who was at Yale at the time, Derek Bell, and two other people decided that the critical legal theory was not useful to the fullness of the legal education because it left out the ways in which race played into the legal process. And so they developed, primarily Derek Bell, this methodology called critical race theory that quite simply looks at the way that race figures into the legal process, so that when somebody comes up, for example, before a judge, and then the American Bar Association has done studies about this, Black person, a white person, a Black male, a white male come before the same judge for the same offense. And too often the white defendant has gotten a slap on the hand with probation or something, and the Black person has been sent to prison. And so why then, do we find such a large percentage of the prison population, for example, to be Black males and also Black women? And they looked at the cases and all that, and it came that race figured into this legal process. And then took it a step further to say that why is it that we keep struggling with this whole question about race in this country? I mean, just about every generation since the founding of this country has confronted this whole question about racism, race and racism. Why can't we get rid of it? And so humanists and social scientists and political scientists entered into the conversation at that point. I was one of them that said the reason why we have such a difficult problem and struggling with this whole question of race and racism is because it is embedded in our cultural institutions in this country. It is taught, it is reinforced by the very institutions that we value. And so how do we then address this whole question about race? How do we start deconstructing this whole thing and moving toward a better future, in this country? Well, we have to address the root causes, this kind of systemic nature of racism, in this country. And part of that, a big part of that, is in the educational system, that young people are not being taught the full history of this country. They're leaving people out, too many people out. I have done studies myself right here in Georgia of textbooks in the public school systems, for example, where when you start looking at the mention, the treatment in the text of non-white people, Black people, Native Americans, Hispanics, Latinos, women, Jewish people, Asian folks, et cetera, the whole gamut of people, gay people, et cetera. You find in the textbook that we're not there. And if we are there, it's a very small mention, and it's usually very negative, also. And so how do we then start to try to correct this difficulty, this kind of problem, if we're going to actually move toward a multiracial, pluralistic, inclusive society? Well, then we have to address the root causes, and let's start, because I'm an educator, so let's start with education. And there are other aspects of our society where this figures in as well. For example, the National Football League just recently dropped the dual way that they were addressing the whole question of CTE, the brain injuries that was causing such difficulty for pro athletes, pro football players. They found that white athletes, football players who had been diagnosed with CTE had no problem. They were going through the process, and then they were able to be treated, and then monies were released to them so that they wouldn't miss paychecks and all that sort of thing. While Black football players were being denied the same process because the assumption of those who were making the decision was that Black folk are behind developmentally anyway. And so CTE does not really impact Black people as much as it impacts white people, because when you see Black people not functioning up to the level of normality, well, they don't function that way anyway, et cetera. And so it was a racist construct there. And so a lawsuit was brought by a number of Black players, and the National Football League had to not only recant that position, revise it, but also had to pay large sums of money, millions of dollars, to those claimants. And so this whole question of race and the ways in which people are left out, Black and brown people, Asian people, people who don't fit the mold, you might say, of so-called normality in our culture, is really a huge thing. I've argued for many years when I was on the state commission, advisory commission for the education of teachers, to develop the exams by which teachers were authenticated, right, certified. Now it's called the GACE, right? And my argument was that the way that we have to address it is to require a unit that teachers will have to satisfy in their undergraduate preparation on multicultural issues, diversity, et cetera. Because if we can do that, then we start to plug those holes and address systemically, the kinds of problems that we're faced with and that we're having. It has been to my joy that so many young people who are teaching, many of whom came through places like Mercer, I have had some contact with. They've reached out to me and in fact asked for materials to augment and supplement those materials that they have that leave people out. And so we know the desire is there to correct what has been incorrect. We simply have to have the political and societal will, to get it done. You say. But that's the whole thing about critical race theory. Just teach the whole thing, teach everything. For example, and I'll quit with this one. I can talk for a long time. Brenda knows this about these kinds of things. This is my whole life. Barry knows this. He's heard me lecture several times. All right. That, for example, Black veterans, World War I, World War II, veterans. The dominant narrative is that these people were heroes. They went and they defended. They made things right for us so that we can have freedom, you know, et cetera. When they came back supposedly to a hero's welcome, and there were all these amenities that were handed out to take care of them, except for Black ones. You know, Black veterans were not able to access those type of amenities. Not only were they not able to access the veterans benefits, but they came back not to a hero's welcome, but too often to lynch mobs that told them that, you know, you better not walk out your house with that uniform on. Take that uniform off. You don't deserve to wear that uniform. One of my cousins, in fact, in Louisiana, the whole reason why I grew up in Los Angeles was because of racism in Louisiana. My parents wasn't standing for it, and so part of that westward migration of Black folk into the western areas, especially into Los Angeles. And one of the reasons was that I had a cousin who was a veteran, and he was being threatened by the Klan and other hate groups with being lynched, you know, because he wore his army uniform, you know, out in public, etc. And so the vigilantes, you know, came to my grandmother's farm in Lake Charles, where my cousin was living, and accused him of pretending like he was a soldier, and also of looking at a white woman. And they wanted to, you know, do their thing, kill him, etc. So, you know, my parents and my three of my uncles took my cousin with them. He was a young guy, you know, at that time, and they all went out and moved to LA, to Los Angeles, you know. So the whole story has to be told, you know. What happened to women, you know, for example, you know, what happened to, like I say, you know, Asian people. I mean, people who are Irish, for example, who were treated just about as badly as Black people, you know, were treated, you know, at some point. The whole story of this country really has to be told if we're ever going to move past the kind of obstacles that continue to manifest themselves. So, so that's what I have to say. I mean, I can say a whole lot more, but I really want to hear what you have to say and to dialogue with you.
That was great. I really appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, for me, this is very dear, especially with my work in genealogy, which is, right, you know, basically my area, and just having a greater understanding of the history where I came from. And I believe that it's so important, especially you said in education with children, for them to know where they come from, to understand their people, to understand the struggles and the experiences that their ancestors had. It doesn't necessarily mean that anyone is trying to demonize white people. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that some whites truly believe that this history is going to bring up all the ugliness that occurred back then. And truly it should. It was ugly. It wasn't attractive.
Yeah.
And so I just believe that truth, you know, what is it? The truth will set you free. Is that what it is?
Right, right. Well, the other thing is that it's interesting to me. I mean, you know, I teach, you know, students, and sometimes I get students who say things like what you just said, right? That, you know, that, you know, some of these things are going to present white people in a bad light and cause Black people to hate white people, and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. I put their minds at ease, and anybody else that I talk to, wherever I lecture and et cetera, by saying there really is quite a lot of present reasons for Black people not to like white people. If that's what you want to do, right? I mean, there's a lot, right? I mean, look at George Floyd, look at Trayvon Martin, look at, right, you know, all these other kinds of things. There's plenty of reasons. We don't have to go too far in the past. We can just talk about the last couple of years. That there's reason, you know, and this very far right, you know, movement that seeks to reestablish, white superiority, in this country. So, we can take that off the table. Let's, we don't want to make white people look bad. First of all, when I'm teaching, I tell my students at the beginning of the semester that one thing I will not tolerate in my classes is for any of my students, and my students usually are either half and half, black, white, and other, folks, brown, and et cetera, or predominantly black, students who are drawn to my classes. I've been around here long enough that my classes are, and I am kind of self-selecting, students who don't think that black people have value don't enroll in my classes. They learned that very quickly after I came here. Barry can attest to that, right? But I tell them one thing I will not tolerate is lumping all white people into one group.
Right.
And saying white people this or white man that, et cetera, and all that. I tell them without the support and active participation, and sometimes outright sacrifice, even to the sacrificing their lives of some white people, and I don't want to characterize them as liberal, I just think they're good people who did not want to see black people suffer, and all that. Without those people, we would never have ended slavery in this country. We would not have ended segregation, in this country. The first person who was a freedom rider, in fact, that got beat up within an inch of his life in Alabama was a white guy who got off the bus. This guy was 17 years old. He got off the bus, told the black people to stay on the bus because it was a lynch mob that showed up. And he said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. He got off the bus and he took the beating that they, lynch mob, wanted to give the black people. So, I mean, there are many instances, John Brown, for example, during slavery, and many others who stood in the gap for people of African descent, and also for simply for justice, for everyone. So no, I tell them, no, you anytime you say this, I'm gonna put a mark by your name, and it's not gonna end up well for you when I start figuring out grades, because I don't like that, right? I'm not gonna tolerate that. What I tell them is, do not say white people, say white people who embrace white supremacy. That's a whole statement.
It is. It's definitely a statement.
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
a whole.
And I think that's part of the problem on both ends is groupthink. Black people do this, or white people do this, or behave this way, and you just can't place everybody, I call it, in that box. You just do that. You were speaking of how whites lost their lives, and I'm trying to think of the name of the plantation houses over on Mercer's, right next to the law school. The name escapes me. Is it Weatherby Plantation? Anybody out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about the Weatherby, and then there's the Jarrell Plantation, but it's farther away.
The one that's right over there next to Mercer's Law School. The owner of that, and his last name was Bond, and was killed by an overseer.
Mm-hmm.
Because that overseer mistreated one of the enslaved people that worked for him, took him out, killed him. So my point to you, just like you were saying, is so often we forget about the people who really help with sometimes in the struggle by lumping them together. I certainly agree with that.
Right.
I kind of wanted you to touch on too some of the mistreatment that Native Americans, some of the things that's been going on within their community. Go
ahead.
Some of the procedures and policies that's really impacted them that would be a part of this study that's being left out.
Well, lots of people, I think, have forgotten about the Indian Removal Act.
Okay.
In the 19th century. The whole reason why we could be here in Georgia,
that's right.
Building buildings, Mercer could be here, the hospital, et cetera, businesses, et cetera, is because the native population here, the Creeks, were forcibly removed from Georgia and relocated. So, well, to Oklahoma. I hate to say relocated. They were forced to move, and so and the whole Trail of Tears, where somewhere around 50,000 Native Americans lost their lives. They were forced to walk the entire place from Georgia and also parts of Florida and South Carolina, et cetera, over to to Oklahoma. And then once in Oklahoma, Montana, the areas that used to be called the Great Plains, now they've just been incorporated into the Midwest. They were placed, relocated supposedly to lands that were barren.
Right.
And now we found out that the lands actually aren't barren because they've discovered oil on quite a few of those reservations, supposedly reservations, et cetera. But when I was in Nebraska, my first job was at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, coming out of graduate school. And a lot of people look at me and they say, "You were in Nebraska?" I say, "Yeah, that was a couple of the best years of my career, actually." While I was in Nebraska, I really didn't, I was in Lincoln, I wasn't in Omaha. If I'd have been in Omaha, the situation would have been very, very different. But while I was in Lincoln, I was this young professor. I was 25 years old when I came there with a doctorate. I was the youngest person they'd ever hired, the only Black professor there, which is something that, I had gotten accustomed to, being the first. When you're Black, you go through this first thing, you all, yeah, and which I don't take as a compliment myself. I feel like Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, the great Black scholar, when he got his doctorate from Harvard and became quite famous, and they said, "Well, you were the first Black to get a doctorate from Harvard," and Du Bois said, "Yes, and I assure you the honor was Harvard's." So I kind of agree with him, that way. I don't see that I was honored. I was not the first smart Black person, that came through that doctoral program or that should have been hired, at the university. But when I was there, the whole question about problem with Native Americans and the reservations and all that and how they're being treated was at its height. There were trials that were going on. There were still aspects of the Wounded Knee trials, in fact, that were taking place in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Black people were sheltering the Native Americans who were coming into town by letting them stay in their homes, because they could not stay in hotels. They wouldn't rent rooms to them, and that sort of thing. And, so the Black community kind of protected the Native American population and embraced them. And I learned a lot about the problems of people, our Native American brothers and sisters, on reservations, a high incidence of things like alcoholism, from not from trying to deal with the pressures of life, abject poverty, diseases. One of the highest incidents that the media is not talking about of COVID infections is actually on Native American reservations. The death rate of people on COVID on Native American reservations is astronomically high. You say, you have this whole thing that where, in America, of course, this country, you tried to kill them off, not you, but, that didn't work. And so now let's move them so that we can have the nice places and, let's move them and forget about them. You see? So what has happened though with many Native Americans is that they formed a very powerful organization. And some of the young people who were babies that were taken from their parents with this, they had an experiment whether or not Native American people could be made to be like white people. And they took these kids as babies from their parents and took them to areas to, try to raise them. They cut their hair, which was a no-no for Native American culture, et cetera, and completely separated them from their families, from their communities, from their tribal associations, their traditions, et cetera. What they didn't realize, however, is that those young people would grow up and want to know who they were. And so they did a little research and found out what had happened to them. And they became very angry and very, very active. And they formed a very powerful organization that has been filing lawsuits against states and also federal government. First, for the recovery of their lands. It's been successful in Oklahoma, for example. Nearly a third, more than a third, almost half of Oklahoma has been returned to Native Americans because of this process. They've also been able to win the right to have certain, it's not really amenities. It's kind of like a payback, of course, of what that was taken from them, so that anyone who is 1/4 Native American who was actually raised on a reservation can access certain opportunities, like houses, money down on houses. The federal government would pay money down on houses. Their children can go to school for free, that sort of thing, right? So they've been able to win some reparations, as a result of that. But still, in this day and time, I mean, Native Americans are really struggling. When I was in Nebraska, in fact, one of the favorite things that some of these yahoos would do, these white supremacists, the reservations were in the western part of the state, and one of the favorite things that some of these yahoos would do would be to load up in a pickup truck with their guns and go and try to find a Native American off the reservation, and they kill them. South Dakota, the same thing happened.
Leslie Morris has her hand up. I think she might have a question.
Okay.
Yes, I have a question. What are people so afraid of about critical race theory, and what do we do about it?
What they're afraid of, I believe, is that there will be a generation of young people who will grow up not thinking the same way that they think. They'll vote different. They will relate to people different. They will seek to have a more inclusive society. There'll be a threat to power and to white supremacy and white privilege. And when you have the full story, it's kind of hard then to look at people as an other, as someone who does not have the rights and privileges, or shouldn't have them, the same rights and privileges that that you have. And so that's one thing that I believe is problematic. The second is, and someone said this to me, and I think it makes plenty of sense. The fear is retribution. That if the whole story is told, there's going to be a whole lot of angry people, non-white people. And what will then happen? I mean, in the 18th century, Thomas Jefferson wrote a very famous text called Notes on the State of Virginia. And in that text, I see a couple of you shaking your head, you've read it, right? In that text, Jefferson is in Virginia, right? And he's like the lead guy, and all. He writes this text and he's classifying everything. Here's what's in Virginia. Here are the birds, here are the mountains, the rivers, and all that kind of stuff. Then he comes to people, right? And he says, yeah, we have white people here, population and different groups, ethnic groups of white people. We have Native American people here, and maybe they can be like white people. They have culture, they have language, they have religion. They wouldn't allow themselves to be enslaved, et cetera. So Native American people, yeah, there's some hope for them. Then he comes to Black people and he said, whoa, slow down now. You know, I don't know, these Black people, they're so different than we are, you know, et cetera. And then he says in there, amongst other things, that he's not really convinced that slavery should continue, which is interesting since he had slaves himself and fathered like 13 slave children from a Black woman named Sally Hemings, but still he's writing this, right? Don't know whether slavery is the answer, you know, to dealing with this population of Black people. I don't know, however, that freedom is the answer because Black people have good memories. He says this in this text. Black people, they don't have a lot of else to work with, but they have some real good memories. And they're going to remember all the crap we've pulled. And if we let them free, there's going to be a race war. And one race or another is going to win. So, well, I guess we ought to keep them enslaved. Right? This same fear that Thomas Jefferson talked about, I think is still active now.
Mm-hmm. I truly believe that. And I just had a thought that came in. I'm raising my granddaughter, and so, you know, I'm teaching her lineage. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it, and I said, now she's going to go to school and do it too. She's going to talk about her lineage. So how can you keep truth out of school anyway when we're teaching our kids? I mean, it should be in the curriculum, mm-hmm. But you know, I'm having to answer questions, you know, about that, about slavery and just different things that was going on back then, and segregation simply because of bringing up facts.
Yeah, well, you know, a big part of the problem is that our educational system is coupled with the political process.
It is.
And so what I mean by that is that state boards of education are those that, you know, give the guidelines on what needs to happen, right? Classroom teaching and all that. State and then local boards of education then take those guidelines and they actualize, right? The problem with this is that the state board and then some committees like, you know, for the certification of teaching and all that, they're all appointed by the governors of states. And so people don't realize when they either vote or don't vote for state representatives, governors, you know, state legislators, you know, et cetera, that they're also determining what kind of educational system we're going to have in the state, you know. So I've been arguing for a long time that we need to uncouple the political process from the educational process. Let educators determine what's going to be taught, not politicians, right? Not people who are appointed about political process. Part of the problem, I was talking about COVID, for example. That's at the forefront of all of our minds and lives. The state system, right? Georgia State University system. I have lots of colleagues that teach at the Georgia State University system, and they cannot require students to wear masks, for example. Something simple like that to try to keep the spread of COVID down, you know, et cetera. They can't because the governor said, no, you can't do it. And then the regents, who are all appointed by the governor, right? And also they said that you can't do it. Now, the problem with the regents is there's not one educator on the regents board, not one. They're all business people or political folks. So, you know, we have a political process controlling the educational system. And so to start, you know, uncoupling those things helps us lead to getting to the kind of systemic nature of why this thing continues to regenerate itself, no matter who's in office, no matter who is teaching, no matter what level of education that we're at, all the way from elementary school, all the way up to colleges and universities, you know, et cetera. We still have the same process, you know, the same systemic nature that continues to fuel these, you know, these problems. The other Go ahead, Barry.
Well, Chester, I guess what the thing that gets me is that you have these people now proposing laws which will prevent us from teaching critical race theory, and yet we don't know what critical race theory is.
Right.
So how would they enforce such a law?
The same way they enforce other stupid laws, just go around and penalize people that you don't like, that kind of thing. What I have told teachers, many of them have asked me about this kind of thing, right? I was on a Zoom conference with some educators just a few months ago, right? This subject came up, and I told them, I said, well, they asked me, what should we do? I said, well, don't teach critical race theory. Teach the truth.
Yeah.
And don't mention critical race theory. Just don't mention it, right? And then they ask you what you're teaching. I'm teaching history. I'm teaching sociology. I'm teaching English. I'm teaching, social studies or whatever. All that. Well, you teaching critical race theory? Oh, no. Not me.
Love your subversive attitude.
Yes.
I think you're right about the politicization of education, but in the meantime, I'd like to make an overture to the activists among us. I'm in the process of writing a letter, which may turn into a letter to the editor, I'm not sure. But what I believe is that we should teach everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we should teach students the skills to handle divisive discussions, to handle responsible conversation, to handle conflict resolution. And if we taught those skills, we would all have better tolerance for handling tough issues.
Right.
And what they're trying to, anytime you ban a book, guess what happens? It suddenly becomes the bestseller list. So banning critical race theory is going to backfire just like everything else has.
Right.
But we don't need to let our legislators get away with that. I think here's an opportunity for us as activists.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Lynn had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I listened to Monday's Youth Education Committee meeting where they discussed, what was it? House Senate Bill 226, which is, essentially banning the critical race theory, although they don't say that in the bill. They talk about not allowing teachers to teach anything that would make any one group of people feel bad. So they can't teach that white people are bad. You said, Chester, that you don't allow that to be taught in your class.
No, I
But
don't.
they're talking about white people might feel discomfort when there's discussions that are uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Okay, well, a lot of history is uncomfortable. There's a lot of uncomfortable stuff in history. And the way they're going to monitor it is the parents get to report it, and then they're going to investigate it, and then they're going to cut 10% from the school district.
Right.
Which, if one teacher does something, the entire school district has to be penalized. But the discussion, and it was only a discussion meeting, they weren't voting on anything. One of the senators, who's a Black woman, talked about her family in Mississippi and how uncomfortable she felt when she learned about the enslavement of her great-grandparents or grandparents, and what Jim Crow her parents had to go through, and all those. She said, and she kept saying, I felt uncomfortable when I learned this, and I felt uncomfortable when I learned this, and this was my family. She kept going on, and it doesn't get through.
Well,
You could see that the person who had sponsored this bill doesn't want any of this stuff to be taught to his kids. And I wasn't allowed to speak. I wanted to jump in there and say, well, then homeschool your kids.
yeah. Well, the other thing is that, when someone asked me about that, the kind of, we're going to make this whole thing is making some white people feel uncomfortable. And my response was, I felt uncomfortable my entire life.
Yeah.
So let's take that off the table. Black people don't feel comfortable, right? That's why we're so mad That's why we're angry. That's why folks are in the streets, you know. And you know, when after George Floyd, you know, was shot, because finally there was an awakening moment. There was a kind of aha moment. Oh, black people have been telling the truth. You know, all this, they do catch hell, right? And et cetera. And so, and I'm proud of those kids for marching. If I mean, I have a disability. I can't really do a lot of walking. I walk with a cane, and also there's COVID, and I'm in the high risk population. And I told my students, I really apologize for not being out there with you, because if it wasn't for those factors, I would have been right in there.
Me too.
Yeah, right. Because it takes an uncomfortable moment or moments in order to move things forward, right? I'm pretty sure that they're in this country that getting rid of segregation made those people who were benefiting from segregation very uncomfortable. No question about it. You know, getting rid of slavery made slave owners uncomfortable. They raised holy hell.
Oh, yes, they.
Yeah, you know, and in fact forced a compromise whereby the only way they would go along with it was that the federal government had to give them money per slave. So they got reparations for the end of slavery. Slave owners did.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, and these things aren't being taught.
Eleanor Lane has had her hand up.
I believe this critical race theory is just a political term that has been misused intentionally and beaten to death on Fox News and other news media. You know, as activists, I think we ought to maybe change the name. I mean, just create a name that has something to do with truth and teaching history. And, you know, there have been people in Macon, one man in particular, and I wish I could think of his name. He's older and in retirement age, and he's been trying for years, and, you know, in his way, to get history taught to Macon students about just the truth.
It really is the truth.
And now we've got people in the country and perhaps in Macon running for school board.
Shut the fuck up.
Gosh,
shut up, you fucking one duck. You cannot be rude to this lady.
Tracy Jenkins?
Gosh, that was a surprise. Did you all hear what I just heard?
Yeah,
Heard that shit.
But anyway, I think, you know, as activists, we need to somehow get together and
Shut the fuck up.
Tell the truth, encourage
I
our
apologize. I'm working
that's
on
okay.
trying to remove people
No.
who are unruly.
No
this-
need to apologize, Georgia. It's okay.
Right. This is what we face.
Yeah, this is the kind of shit that just happens. You know, you got to put up with it.
These people don't like our meetings.
I like, you know, I like contention. I don't
Same,
like.
I like contention too. I like a little conflict.
I don't think anything happens, but we've gone under ever since Trump came into the picture, 2016, at least we've got truth being denied.
No, Trump was a good president. Why do you want to say those things about him? Trump was a good person.
I disagree with you. As I don't think he should have been elected president. My biggest, you know, fear is that people have been brainwashed, and now they don't recognize the truth. But my point is, I think we need to have education. You know, the state, local Board of Education, we need to somehow organize as activists and be more forceful in pushing teaching history as
Hello.
it is the truth, and just forget this critical race theory, because that's all about the election coming up, and they don't want to. They're going to keep beating that together. I mean, beating it to death, and we're losing. We need to get focused on something positive and forget this term being bounced around.
Well, I think that it goes deeper than the critical race theory, the book burning, the white supremacy issues. There's a movement here that there's an attempt to undermine our public health education system.
Right.
And push toward privatization. It started under the previous administration, where you can have citizens suing teachers. There's an attempt to erode the strength of our public health, our public education. And that is really, I think, the greatest concern, because all of these things are an attempt to erode that foundation. And what will happen is the folks who will be most disadvantaged educationally will be those folks that are always most disadvantaged educationally. It will be children who come from poor families who can't afford to provide private education. The funding, the eroding of funding toward public education. This is all, the way I look at it is this is one more attempt to undermine our public system.
And public, no, go ahead.
No, I'm
public education is the foundation of our democracy.
Yes.
I mean, I have been, to countries where there are dictators. And the first thing that dictators do is shut down the universities and the educational system, because that's where the opposition comes from. People think, they're not sitting around just following directives of someone who in many cases was never elected. I mean, just took over, right? Got the military to go along with them. And they just, took over, paid off the military, et cetera. And the first thing they did was shut down the educational systems. I was trying, because I was working with the African Union for about 10 years. I'm still associated with them, but I was very active with the African Union. I was the secretary for the African Union ambassador to the US. And so I was trying to establish a relationship with African institutions, right, here at Mercer, right, that we could then have exchanges, et cetera, and joint programs, and all that. It didn't work. I had to finally give up, because those universities aren't open all the time, because if there's some political upheaval, the first thing the president does is shut them down. Messing with the our educational system is no small matter, at all. It is big, it is huge. And as I've said, it is literally the foundation of our democracy. Some people, I was speaking somewhere here, and the whole question that came up about our taxes to support the school system, here. Some people were arguing, well, they don't have kids in school anymore. Why should they, have to pay for other people's kids to learn and all that? And so I raised my hand and I said, well, I don't have a problem with paying property taxes that go to the schools. I mean, first of all, schools should not be funded with property taxes. They should be funded with state taxes, right? That's built-in inequity, right there. But since they are, I don't have a problem with my property taxes, a large percentage of them going to the schools. because I don't want to live in a community, in a state with ignorant people.
Me either.
I just don't. I mean, and so that bit of money that comes out of my property taxes that goes to the school, I gladly surrender, because I don't want to have to deal with ignorant people.
I think that we all agree we have some major problems. I want to know how we're going to go about fixing them. We can teach history in the schools, but the textbooks don't have the true history. The textbooks are written by white men, and they're
Not
going
all
to
of
write.
them. Not
Not
all
all
of
of them. You're right.
them. Yeah. Go ahead.
But most of them.
Well, not even most of them.
Mhm.
There's a large body, a huge body of text available that can be used in our school system that teach the whole thing. Right. The problem is that the people who make the decisions about what texts are standard tend to be those who are appointed by folks that don't have the best interest at heart.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Other people, right? And so, how do we start fixing it? People vote.
And
Voting.
I think that's the issue right there in a nutshell.
Yes. Vote. And I tell my students, my students raise these questions. With me, well, Dr. Fontenot, we're talking about all these things. What do we do about it? Vote. And
Yep.
they said, and our students said, is that simple? Yes, it really is. Vote. And then watch what those people you voted for do, right? And so, don't just vote and go sit down, right? But then you vote and then you watch what those people you voted for do, all right? And what positions they take. And if they turn out to be a dud, vote somebody else in. Next.
I'm with you on that all the way.
I agree.
Democracy is a process. Go ahead.
I see Hinda has her hand up.
Okay, just real quick. I'm new to Macon. Macon Library has an amazing genealogy room.
You're talking about the Washington Library. Yes.
On Washington Street.
Uh-huh.
And I just wanted to point out, as far as politicians, I know in Tennessee recently, they didn't like teaching the Holocaust.
Right.
With Mr. Spiegelman's book, Mouse. And so, as you pointed out, it's, Jewish people also, have this problem sometimes.
Exactly. No question about it. I mean, it's not a competition when in terms of people who are not white, right? I mean, the common thing that we have, non-whites in this country, is that just about every group that's non-white that has come to this country has had hell for some period of time, some longer than others, right? And some more intense than others. But there have been problems for people who have come here who are not white, right? And people who are here. So we have more in common with each other than we have uncommonness, right? And so what one way to address this whole thing is that instead of looking at this as a Black issue, as a brown issue, as a Jewish issue, as a immigrant issue, whatever, it's a human issue. It's a human issue. It really is, And is it okay, and I'm gonna have to go to a meeting, so I'm gonna have to make this quick. But is it okay for us to sit back and allow those who do not have the best interest of the good of the whole to dominate the educational system, education of our children? Is that right? Is it good? What can we do about it? And I argue, well, first thing we can do about it, not go around just calling people and find out what they're teaching in the classroom and give the teachers hell, because too often the teachers don't have that much choice in terms of what they teach, right? Even local school boards, for example, are limited in terms of what they can kind of prescribe. What we have to do is get people elected and appointed to key positions so that we don't have to keep having this same issue, that when something happens, we can pick up a phone or text or or email, you know, somebody and say, do you know what this is happening in Macon, Georgia, in the Bibb County, you know, school district, and we don't think it's right. And then we'll have someone who has some authority, but also has their head on straight, you know, who will be able to look at that and make some corrections, right? Initiate a process. That's what we need to do. I'm sorry, I have to go. I have a meeting with the dean at 1 o'clock, but I really enjoyed this, except for one person. But you know, those people exist, and we can't do much about them except mute their mics. You know.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. It's good to see everybody.
Muted them as fast as I could.
It's good to see you
Thank
again,
you.
Barry.
Thank you,
And
sir.
all of you.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
and anytime I can do
you very
anything to help y'all out, or you need me to do something, let me know. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before the rest of you
Thank
get
you.
off, you know, we have Lynn's list that goes out pretty much every week that has call to action items on it. And since Lynn is here and you know better how to help with the advocacy piece, and you have some suggested scripts in Lynn's list that they can send out and who they need to send it to.
Well, some of the, if we're just specifically talking about critical race theory, one of the things we did already was we did reach out to the Youth Education and Youth Committee, I forget what it is, that will be heard this on Monday. And we sent those out. We don't know if that's going to advance, but if we do know, we will definitely be addressing it again. And yeah, I do write up little scripts about, just to give you an idea what you should say. It's suggested, you can use it or you can modify it. It's suggested that you modify it and make it personal, which quality public education is one of Georgia Women's core principles, and this is certainly a K through 12 and higher education issue, especially if the state says, well, K through 12, you can't teach this and you can't teach that, and we're going to ban this book. That's something that will probably be coming up, book banning, because they're having some discussions about that as well. So as Chester said, or someone else on the sitting in today said, the minute you ban that book, that becomes a bestseller. And many areas, many school districts are having book clubs based on the banned books. So we could do something like that for the kids in the community.
Sure.
That would be something that was, okay, we're going to talk about mouse this week or whatever. I mean, some of the books that are being considered for banning, like To Kill a Mockingbird and 1984, doesn't it sound like 1984 when you ban books? I mean, it just goes on and on. So anyway, if you're interested in seeing what Georgia Women is doing as far as advocacy, sign up for our newsletter and our on our website, which I guess we can put in the chat, huh? And then you'll get some scripts. So.
Well, thank you so very much. Are there any questions out there, lingering questions?
I don't have a question, but I would just, this is Mary Lou Ezel, League of Women Voters. One of the things we have to start paying attention to are the down ballot races. And it's not just about who is the president, although that's incredibly important. We have many opportunities this spring in Bibb County. We have two people who are on the Board of Education at large that are up for re-election. You have to pay attention at that end. That, you know, there's so much turmoil now on our Board of Educations throughout the country, not particularly ours, but we read it in the newspaper and we see it on the news, what's happening and those are things people don't pay attention to. And we need to do it. And along with Georgia Women and the Macon chapter of Links, we're going to be sponsoring 4 forums on the candidates for the primary election coming up in May. So I hope everybody can join us on that and see who is running for office.
Well,
And pay attention. Thank you.
No, thank you so very much. And so if that is, I believe that this concludes our lunch and learn. Did we have fun?
Yes.
Yeah,
It was-
that's
it was
good.
Those who were admitted into this room, and there were probably 80 more that I have reported.
But,
That was kind of fun.
So those people who are checking the recording on Facebook will now know you've been reported. I hope you can be booted off of Zoom altogether.
Great.
Good for
Y'all.
you.
Bless your heart.
Share, 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 share. So those who were not present today can participate. And so hit that share button, from Georgia Women. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Mesa, one more thing, and make sure you get good people to run for office.
Yeah.
It's one thing to vote, but if we don't have good people to run for office, then we're voting for people who are running unopposed or whatever. So, or not voting for those who are running unopposed.
I have one more thing to say. Well, actually two. One, this is just the first of our lunch and learns. There will be more. So keep an eye out for more. And also along the same lines as what Lynn said, please check your registration. Some voting rolls have been cleaned up, and perhaps you might have been cleaned off the voter roll. So please check your registration.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'd say one more thing too, is that language matters. What we say matters. And academics understand what a theory is. A theory is not something that hasn't been proved. As a matter of fact, it's tantamount to truth. So instead of critical race theory, why don't we start calling it critical race truths?
Sounds like a winner.
Yeah, we can make that change ourselves. So whenever anybody tells you theory, you said, yes, it's critical race truths.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you at the next lunch and learn. Be safe.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.